All right, and so I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves, and we hope you enjoy.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think first we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll move into discussion. My name is Suzanne Greenlaw. I'm a citizen of the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians. I recently got my graduate degree, my doctorate degree, and I have a postdoc at Schoodic Institute. I work towards Wabanaki-led restoration. I am a harvester myself, and typically I do work with Wabanaki harvesters and natural resource departments situations. Yeah, and so I'm really here to help push forward self-determination of Native people, Wabanaki people, within especially our environmental spaces.
CO, my name is Honor Keeler. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation. I am a teacher and educator, and I worked a lot in sacred lands protection and Indigenous human rights over the years. I most recently was at Brown University. I see one of my fellow colleagues here in the audience. Ruth, it's good to see you. And I'm here to talk to you today about what's going on in the world, what our futures might look like, but also to ensure that we're kind of entering into these spaces in recognition of humanity, both of people here in this audience and everything that surrounds us. So thank you all. I look forward to learning from you today as well. Sherri?
Koe Pasidawin, Ndaliwisi Wanahamu Gwasat and Najiobana Wabskewi. My name is Sherri Mitchell. I'm from the Penobscot Nation, and I am an Indigenous attorney. I'm also the executive director of an organization called the Land Peace Foundation. And we do a lot of equity and justice work within the environmental field. We do a lot of climate change adaptation and mitigation work internationally, working with organizations that are working with frontline communities who are facing immediate extinction of their way of life in relation to their land loss, which is heartbreaking on most days. And I, like these other two incredibly intelligent women, who I'm honored to be on stage with, am hoping to have a discussion about what does it look like to weave a sustainable future, and what does that even mean? We want to think about, some of the magical thinking that surrounds a lot of this slogans connected to environmentalism and our current ecological reality, and think about what those things mean in real time and in real ways for people who are living on the ground in areas that are most impacted. And I'd like to turn it back over to Suzanne, who's going to start us off with some discussion about some of the work that she's done and some of the ideas that she has about these things.
Great, thank you. I wanted to open up to help start thinking about even the title, right? Weaving a sustainable environment. Oftentimes I feel like in this stage, in this platform, it feels like we're here to offer some sage wisdom, right, that a non-Native person might take away and implement in their life. That would mean something. And I'm not against that approach, but sometimes that feels like it's perpetuating this anthropological Native fantasy idea, right, that we have some kernel of wisdom for you to unlock something. And, because when I think about a sustainable future and what that looks like, I think about Native people, right? What does that look like for Wabanaki people to be able to engage and practice in their sustainable future? When you all hear that title, who are you? Who's the subject of that thought for you, right? So for us, I feel like when we're actually often reduced, we have less access to places, we have a reduced land base based on our histories with the state and federal governments. Land theft, our the trees, these all timber industry was stolen. Well, that wasn't our industry, but that land base, based from our caretaking responsibilities, was then stolen and uplifted the state. So our own sort of technologies and economies were depressed, right? And we weren't really capable of thriving in that space, and that still actually continues today in some ways, right? So I work a lot with access issues along the state, along the coast in particular. And to access a lot of conservation lands, federal, state lands, we have to engage in their policy and approaches of conservation, which is typically a preservationist approach. So the fear of humans on landscape, that humans will always sort of negatively impact the landscape, is the basis of that sort of philosophy. And so when we think about our sustainable future, we are still denied sort of our full expression of our practice for our sustainability. So I guess I want to move into this talk and this idea of some mutual benefits, or that through Native caretaking roles and rights in those spaces, that we will mutually benefit. And that's one avenue of a sustainable future. I'll just want to start there.
What comes to mind when you talk about that is some of the work I did out at Bears Ears National Monument some years ago. And the people there had been using firewood for a long time. It was part of sustainable use that had been going on since time immemorial before that. And initially, I think the talks there were to stop that firewood use from occurring because, of these sort of Western notions, a lot of the time of how to approach the land. And the people there managed to turn that around and ensure that continued. But those conversations are so important. Out there are a lot of public lands, and there are a lot of environmental impact statements and Section 106 processes and all these things that come into play under federal law that are meant to protect the environment and protect animals and all of these things that came about in the 1970s, in particular with the passage of environmental laws, and prior to that, preservation laws in the 60s, and some of the amendments that came around in the 1990s. But what was missing from those early conversations were Native people. And in the 90s, that started to become more of that conversation, but there was sort of the concept of consultation that came into play, and it was a compromise at that point so that Native voices could be heard. But really what we should be talking about is consent. And historically, and I don't want to go on too long about this, but historically, our capacity for consent and recognition under the law had been taken away as the expansion of Western law occurred, and our lands started to be taken from us. And so now there's more of this conversation of consent going on, but the laws aren't being passed to support tribal communities. And so we're still in this checklist process, that exists that says, oh, we can go through these motions, but there's nothing substantive in the law that can help ensure that our Native places, our Native people continue to have control, have oversight, can continue where we are. So in my discussions, I talk a lot about the back and forth in administrations that occurs. But I want you all, as we're here today, to think a little bit more deeply about these processes. And we're talking about sustainable futures and what can happen in the future. As you're here today, in particular, and hearing us and you hear from other people, I would love for you to become, the change, the people who create that change. And that's the future I'd love to see for everyone here. Sherri, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
I want to take up 1 minute of my time to say that, these are very humble women. And Suzanne is working on a Wabanaki land trust, and she's been involved in the preservation of the ash tree with the emerald ash borer, and she's really working on protection and conservation of sweetgrass. But, is not going to say that about herself. She's also an author, wrote a beautiful little children's book on the sacredness of sweetgrass with her husband. And Honor has been doing incredible sacred sites protection work for a very long time, including work on repatriation or rematriation of ancestral remains from around the world. And so I just want to acknowledge the important work that they're doing. One of the things that we were talking about earlier is, what Suzanne alluded to about this notion that this romanticism of an Indigenous solution to the challenges that we're facing. And though I really believe that Indigenous ways of being and ways of knowing provide us a necessary pathway forward, it's too narrow a view to be able to think that Indigenous peoples are going to solve the problems that colonial actors have inflicted upon the earth for the last several hundred years. And so, when we're thinking about how we move forward, we suffered all of the victimization of the impacts of that behavior. We are now not going to carry the burden of it alone for you. So you have to step up to the table and start doing your work too. So I think that's a really important piece. But also thinking about ways that removal happens. You often think about, they're going to take the land away. People are going to be forced off, or there's going to be some, unilateral illegal taking, like there was here with the Penobscot River. But it doesn't always look like that. One of the things that we were talking about earlier is about Snowbowl, and about how when you think about what happened there, this is a place where 13 tribes came together, filed a suit to protect this sacred place that all of them used for ceremonial purposes and for the harvesting of medicinal and ceremonial plants. For 10 years, I was involved in this case, working with both the Navajo Nation and the Hopi, and looking at all of the ways that the actors involved in this behaved in nefarious ways towards the tribal interests. So there was a data collection process through which they got information on how did the tribes use this land? What were the sacred uses for this land? And once they had that information, they set about destroying those cultural and traditional uses. So when people said we use this land for ceremonial, our ceremonial way of life, and we collect medicinal plants here, we harvest, traditional medicines here. What can't you have in connection to this that, we can use to prevent any harm? Said, there can't be any illness or death associated with our ceremonial ways of being. Those are kinds of things that were just incidentally mentioned as being taboo. And then there were all of these other things that they went through. And what ended up happening is that there was a fast-tracked, bypassing environmental review permit that was given to the owners of Snowbowl that allowed them to use reclaimed wastewater from hospitals and mortuaries, death and illness, and to use that reclaimed wastewater to make snow for a ski resort at the top of this mountain in Arizona. So that was a cultural and traditional eviction by destroying the cultural and traditional uses of that place without any removal of the people from the land or any denial of access. And so there are all kinds of ways that these types of things happen. It's not just one thing. And so how do we keep track of all that without going mad is the big question, I think. There's so much to it. And so I think what we would like to talk with you about is how do we move forward in a way that's meaningful, that has an impact, and that makes a difference? Because I don't think any of us are interested in talking in platitudes. And so I will again turn it back over to Suzanne to continue the discussion.
Thank you. So oftentimes especially in some of the sweetgrass work I do, there's been a recent focus or spotlight on sweetgrass by the non-native audience. And many people I know find that native people find that challenging, right? That we will be at shows and where a non-native audience will continually ask us about sweetgrass, where to find it, how to find it, where to plant it. They found some from the Midwest. Can they plant it near their house? It's like this, some frenzy feeding that's happening about Native culture and Native spirituality that happens with our cultural materials and our non-human relatives. And that's a really challenging position to be in as we move forward. This idea, I think we have a responsibility, and we're taught that we have a responsibility to educate and be teachers in the world. And then, but what form of teaching is that? We're not really, I feel like a lot of Native people express not wanting to give away their culture, right? That's a little bit of like giving it away. Like they don't want people to see actually how we pick. They don't want to be watched to pick. But they are interested in teaching about worldviews and sort of the expression of why they are there, what that relationship, that generational knowledge and relationship is like with the landscape. And so when I think about how do we teach a worldview, it's challenging, I think, because, I think in any sort of, I think on NPR a month ago I heard how to live more sustainably. That message is out there for everybody, right? So, use less plastic, right? Eat locally. Those are pretty common actions to take that we all know about. And I think sometimes, and for our teachings, it's hard to implement them because there's not a system to support them. For Native people, and what I mean by that is that, when we harvest sweetgrass or any kind of these cultural materials that we harvest, they are in a system, an economy that supports the 7th generation, right? We are in a culture that when over-harvesting happens, we have internal governance that sort of can help educate those people who are over-harvesting. So we're not, perfect. We can cause harm. But it's our system that's around us in our community and culture that then sort of reinforces the sustainable values, I think, that are inherent within a generational sort of approach. So what does that mean for you all? I'm not really sure, honestly, to be truthful. I think identifying actions in your own life that do not support sort of the 7th generation or a future generational, value system, right? For us, our economy is like when you buy a basket here, you're buying a sustainable economy, right? When we harvest black ash, we are harvesting the same stands that our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers harvested in every couple of years in the same place. And then the process of the relationship with the tree and the harvester in making that basket, that is actually providing care in those landscapes. So, and that supports a full income from some people. So those types of economies are not sort of in conflict with our values of landscape and relationships. They actually heal a landscape. So you can buy into systems that heal landscapes. And I think that is a lesson that could be applied more often, probably. That, how we make money does not have to be in conflict to our care for the world.
It's really interesting. As you were talking, Suzanne, I was thinking about sort of the roots of where a lot of this consumerism, but quest for universal knowledge and having to know all of these things and consuming knowledge comes from. And there have been a lot of authors over the years that have written about some of these roots. They go back to Greek and Roman times, and a lot of folks center this around the Enlightenment period, I think. And what was happening during that period in Europe is something very different than what was happening here on our homelands. Our people, were not seen as humans, as human beings. And so we got integrated into this system of thinking in a way that has created a foundational basis that has been very difficult to overcome. And what I try to encourage folks to think about, is to come respectfully into our communities and not demand knowledge. And I think Sherri was talking about this a little bit with San Francisco Peaks and Snowball and that whole federal process that ended up putting our tribes in a distressful point of having to give up knowledge to save a place. And that's not right. That's not equality. That's not respect for the environment. That's a loss of so many things. And then it ended up getting exploited. And exploitation, is something that I think, Suzanne, you were talking about, that exploitation has also occurred. So, I think just in trying to advance a little bit of this discussion, and I'll hand it over, to Sherri, is how do you come to these places of ours and not expect performances to be happening all the time, and really have that reciprocity and respect.
Are you queuing me up because of the got privilege hat? We have, the Land Peace Foundation has reclaimed a 215-acre farm to have our land-based campus called Wajukum Tultina Kinship Community. And we have gatherings there, and some of those gatherings are strictly for Native people, and others are open to the public. And we have a hat that says "Got Privilege" with a question mark on it. And so one of the things that we talk about is how do you come into an Indigenous space and receive without taking? I mean, it's really an important question. Do we know how to receive without taking? Can you take something in and have it benefit your being, help to grow you as a person, without having to take it and commodify it? Because that's really the challenge, right? Is everything is taken and commodified and made into a saleable product. Do we know how to behave without making everything into a commodity? And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges, is how do we live in relationship with one another without commodifying that relationship, without having it have to have some financial or spiritual or, amplifying note to it. Can we do that? Do we know how to do that? And so that's something that Honor had the privilege of witnessing, the use of the Got Privilege hat last year when there were 3 women that came to the women's gathering who came up to me at different times on the first full day of the gathering saying, look at all of these wonderful things that I found here on your land and that I'm taking home with me, without ever having asked once if it was appropriate. And I said, wow, you really are of a colonial mindset if you think that it's okay to come into an indigenous territory and take without asking. And, this mortification that came over their faces. But, we have to confront the embedded patterns that we have in a way that allows space for movement of the humanity beyond the saying of the thing, right? So can we make space for our humanity to emerge in this time of crisis, I think is one of the most critical things. And how do we do this? And when we start getting into, this, when I was contemplating what does it mean, one of the questions that was posed to us is, what does success look like? And even built into that, there's an end product, right? There is no end product for what we're trying to accomplish, which is survival and continuity of life into the future. Hopefully there's no end point where we say, okay, that was successful. We lived for this amount of time, you know. And so how do we get out of that end product mindset? How do we get out of that consumptive mindset and start thinking about ourselves in ways that are not commodified? How many of you have ever heard the phrase, you know, that when somebody's single, they're on the market? Even our most intimate relationships have been commodified, you know, that we're selling ourselves for something. And so we have to shift that mindset and also stop thinking that the solution is a product. There is no green savior in the form of technology that's going to come forward and help us out of this situation. You know, there is no market-based solution that's going to solve climate change or our environmental destruction, right? We have to change the way that we live fundamentally. And, you know, that's the conversation that we really need to be having. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you.
Oh, I was just, when you were saying that, Sherri, thinking about stories that, you know, most people come to these markets with good intentions to buy a basket, and I think those end solutions or those end goals in the market base is just embedded in people in a way that they don't even fully understand. Like a really common comment that will happen here is like, say if a basket maker is pounding an asha log or is doing the practice to make the baskets, a common comment will be, do you know that there's a faster way to do that? Yeah. Right. I mean, you know, there's so many things in that statement, right? Like this assumption that the faster way to do that is the smarter way to do that, right? That somehow this person who's been, you know, doing this practice and was taught by their grandfather or this generational knowledge is not smart enough, and that there's always a faster way, a better way to do it. You know, but it's within that practice itself that I think our responsibilities are sort of seeded and grow, because you know, because there's a lot of baskets here. I will just go talk about ash baskets. The process to harvest a basket is very time intensive, right? So these stands that we go to are stands that an elder has shown us, and that he will talk about his great uncles and his family harvesting here. You can walk through a stand and only harvest 1 to 2 trees. You cut one down, and it's very particular, those qualities, those characteristics that you're looking for. And then you put it on your shoulder and carry it out. You know, and then once you get that home, you then pound each part of the log with the back of an axe. And for Native people, there is a process of blood memory, I think, within that action itself, that through our physical movement, it unlocks this genetic memory of relationships, and I call it love, personally. I guess care, you can call it as well. But that knowledge is within us, and through sounds and practices, it vibrates and becomes whole, I think. But that's also very labor intensive. But as you peel the ring width back, you're seeing every year of how that tree grew, right? So you are then talking to a tree of this last 60 years or last 40 years, right? You see maybe what happened within that year. So ash is a ring porous tree. That means it puts on rings every year. It has to put on rings every year to move the nutrients up. And the way it grows in the summertime is a reflection of how much water or drought that was that year. With all these environmental factors influence how a tree grows. So when you're peeling that ash log back, you are then seeing what that tree experienced and how that tree grew. And then you split the ring width down even further, and you can see how dense it is, or what may have happened to that tree, what it may have experienced to create that sort of even finer material. And then people weave a basket with that material, right? So what you see weaving is really just a third or a quarter of what happens. So that's one basket, and then it gets sold to somebody, and then you make another one. But we go back to the same stand again, right? In 2 years, we'll be there again. So we're seeing the same trees year after year. We see them grow, we see them change, and within that, our responsibilities are embedded within the practice. So the idea that you can do it faster, right? What are you losing when you do something faster? What does not become embedded within your worldview if you're going to then have somebody else do it faster for you to make more money, right? You can hire somebody to do it cheaper. I think those are all the questions that are really interesting when somebody says that. I mean, I don't go into that spiel, obviously, to somebody who makes that comment. I just think, how do you shift, or how do you inform people that this approach is intentional? And it's in that intention it ensures a sustainable future, I think. Yeah.
Suzanne, what has happened recently with ash trees? We've lost a ton of ash trees in our part of the world going down the East Coast. How have you all been affected here, and how does that affect the process of what you're talking about?
Well, this emerald ash borer is an invasive beetle that is coming to Maine, or is in Maine. It's in southern Maine, it's in northern Maine, and I think it might be in down east Maine now. But it's within 5 years, potentially, it starts to kill an ash tree, an ash stand. Once it's in a stand, it's then going to move through the stand itself. We are kind of the last to receive this beetle within our homelands. And there's been a lot of work at the University of Maine to help understand what are some proactive responses, and then also what are some responses when the beetle gets here. But it's very devastating for Native people, right? So this material that they've have a relationship with, and as far back as they can count, their family typically has had a relationship with. And basket making is it's an important economy. It was a form of resistance to assimilation policies for us. It was a common statement is that if you know how to make baskets, you'll never go hungry, right? And that's a literal sort of statement of we were being starved to assimilate, and basket incomes did provide a source of income for people to maintain culture, allowed them to maintain culture and feed their family. But so with the potential death of the ash tree, I think there's a lot of uncertainty. But in the community, obviously, there's differences of approach. I tend to be more positive about it. I think that I think Native people are extreme, not that we should be or have to be, but we're extremely resilient. That the knowledge is always within us and can always be reseeded or can be reignited. So I think basket making is in jeopardy for the future. Ash basket making. I think that transition is going to be a challenging one and a really sad one for people. But I think in the future it can come back. Personally, we recently went to New York, and it was shocking. We spent time with Onondaga Nation, and there was a local land trust that said that we could harvest an ash tree there. And we looked for ash, and they were all standing dead. Which was really a devastating experience to come from here, where we have a thriving ash populations, to not that far away and see all these standing dead ash trees. And also the other big issue for me was that it was the first time, Onondaga Nation was 10, 15 miles away, and that was the first time a land trust had sort of allowed a Native person to harvest on their conservation land. And these trees were all standing dead. Those are some major issues. It was so frustrating. But, so I think Native people, and they have a lot to offer and direct for future climate change, adaptation, or how can, I think the focus for us is, or I think the focus for me, at least for us, is what does that look like in our community? How can we find adaptation that benefits us? But thank you. Yeah.
The story reminds me so much about our river cane. In the southeast, along the waterways, there could be 30 miles of river cane in existence there. And there's a whole ecosystem around that. Our woodland bison used to run through there. There was a parrot, a parakeet, Carolina parakeet, that existed in the time when our people were in that part of the country before we had been taken away from our homelands. And they're no more. And it's been a devastating loss. River cane, we made baskets, there were floor mats, it was, I don't know, I hate to compare plastic nowadays because it was a sustainable product, but it was something we used all the time. And we still have basket makers in our communities and artists, who are basing their work off of these very small patches that exist. Roger Kane, who's Cherokee, he's a citizen of the United Kituwa Band, is helping to revitalize that in Cherokee Nation and the United Kituwa Band, and there's been a big effort by the Eastern EBCI in the southeast in our Great Smoky Mountains area to do that as well. But those 30 miles of River Cane are something that will take hundreds and hundreds of years to come back. And, I think about that. I think about the challenges that folks are facing here in your communities now with something that has sustained you, has sustained us for such a long time. And I also think about this moment that we're in right now. And we're sitting here in a very hot auditorium. I see everyone's fanning themselves. I really wish there was a fan on me too. But thank you, Sherri. It's helping a lot. In the East, these temperatures had not been hit for such a long period of time. And I just feel like that heat has moved north. And I think of all those plants and those trees that are out there now, where I live, which is south of here, some of the trees that could survive in more northerly climates are dying off. And it worries me. And I think one of my students this past year actually read Sherri's book in my class, and they said they were so excited about this book that Sherri wrote because it talked about problems, and we're in this kind of point of anxiety about not knowing what to do, but it was offering solutions. Solutions in ways that got people thinking and moving and working collectively about what we can do. And we can do something. I think a lot of people now are stuck and we don't know what to do, but we can do something. So I'm queuing this up again for Sherri. But I'd really love for her to talk about that, and also for Suzanne to offer her perspective as well.
Thank you, Honor. I was thinking when Suzanne was talking about, blood memory, that the follow-up to sacred instructions that I've been working on for years, because I keep agreeing to write all these chapters for other anthologies. The first chapter in it is in Indigenous oral traditions and the sacred science of sound, and how within our stories is the vibration and frequency of our ancestral memory, but also it's akin to migratory knowledge within birds, right? The repetition over and over again becomes encoded in our DNA. And I was actually thinking about this last night because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I was thinking about predictive code. I know, I've lost you. But it's really cool, right? It's like where predictive code is that we have this intellectual capacity to only see so much, and our brain kind of fills in the rest. And we don't know that we're filling in the rest until we come into something that's contrary to what we're predicting. And so we're kind of sensing from the ground, and then the intellect is coming down, and that kind of meets in the middle. and it's forming our experience. And there is this one scientist who talks about this, and he talks about it in relation to that we're constantly having to tell ourselves lies in order to move through life, because he describes something like Parkinson's as the inability to lie to ourselves. Like your body stops moving because the predictive movement stops. And I wondered, why isn't anybody thinking about this as instantaneous co-creation, right? It's not delusional that we're having this predictive moment based on all of the information that we're gathering. It's actually creation in motion. And we have the opportunity to participate in that on an ongoing basis. And so I started going off on a track when I heard her talking about blood memory, and I have something about blood memory that I'm writing about, and all of these things, and thinking about our capacity as co-creators. Like, we lose our sense of power when we forget how powerful we are. That we are Francis Moore Lepay has said many times, why are we collectively creating a world that none of us would individually choose to live in? And so can we make a conscious choice to create something different? And so when I think about where we are right now and where we want to be going forward, I think that one of the mindsets that has to shift, and I see your little 5-minute sign, and I saw it 2 minutes ago, but I'm going to pretend that I just saw it now. Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to understand as human beings is this notion of overshoot. So we have, this ecological overshoot, which means that it lines up with a story we have about Giwalk the cannibal giant. In this story of Giwalk the cannibal giant, Giwalk is a figure that sleeps deep in the forest and only rises to a very particular cry of Mother Earth, Nikweskikdamik. And what happens is when that cry goes out, Giwalk knows that humans have compromised the well-being of Mother Earth, and that humans are consuming faster than Mother Earth can produce and harming her faster than she can heal herself. And so that, in a nutshell, is the definition, the scientific definition of ecological overshoot. And so, our ancient stories carry the wisdom that we need for this time. And so how do we stop consuming faster than Mother Earth can produce? And this is like, self-generating and self-replenishing, like fish stock and forests and the water and arable soil, things like this, that we're harming faster than they can renew. And we need these things to be able to survive. We're not killing off resources for this commodified life. We're actually eliminating the sources of our survival. And so how do we, as human beings, stop engaging in the practices that lead to ecological overshoot? How do we stop consuming so much that we are destroying the world? And built within the mythology of the mindset around that is the idea that individuals can change the reality on the ground. So, if I leave my water on for 2 minutes longer than I should when I'm brushing my teeth, I'm the cause of climate change. We can all do little things that might make a difference, but the reality that we're facing today, right now, is that we need large-scale, coordinated movement. As Suzanne mentioned at the beginning, it can't just be one group of people who's looked to provide solutions. We need coordinated, mutually beneficial actions that can help move entire industries. So what does that mean for you? That means that you have to be willing to be a public pain in the ass to errant politicians. You have to be willing to speak up about the things that are absolutely ridiculous, like subsidizing fossil fuels and electric cars. It's just like mind-bogglingly ironic, right, that we have left these people in charge because of the stupidity with which they're making decisions about our future. And so how do we change that? I think there are a number of things that we can do. I could give you a laundry list of things that we could do, and I'm sure all of us could. But one of the things that I think is really important, so given the increasingly strong likelihood that the powers that be are going to fail. We need to start working actively, which I think all of the tribes here are doing, and every tribal organization in the state is doing, towards relocalization of our survival. How do we get involved in local food sovereignty issues, energy sovereignty, water sovereignty, right? Educational sovereignty, so that we're not being misled. How do we take control of the things that should be part of the commons? On the Penobscot Nation, the first citizen on our tribal census is the Penobscot River. And so I just want to read something to you, and then I'll stop talking, and I think we're going to do Q&A. And I need these now because I'm a grandmother. So I have 3 little grandbabies. They're great. Best thing in the world. If you don't have any, I think you should get some. So this is part of our bylaws for the Land Peace Foundation, and it's regarding our relationship with the land. So the Land Peace Foundation honors the sovereignty of the land, which means we acknowledge the right that the land has to exist, free from molestation and the expectation of human productivity. The reclamation of land by the Land Peace Foundation is viewed as a ceremonial homecoming, a transitional process that moves the land back to its rightful status as a co-equal being, possessing the same rights that we expect for ourselves. It is our intent that the land find sanctuary under the umbrella of our organization. Therefore, the officers and employees of the Land Peace Foundation shall view the land as a living relative, honoring the rights that the land holds when making alterations to or on the land. The Land Peace Foundation further commits to choosing minimally invasive and sustainable practices when working with the land. As an organization and as a collective of human beings, the Land Peace Foundation also honors the right of the land to remain intact. Parcels may be added to our holdings, but no lands shall be marketed or sold unless they are being transferred into the care of an organization with aligned values and commitments toward honoring, conserving, and protecting the land. So into your organizations, thank you, your institutions, your groups, you can come up with language like this that you tie yourself to, and anybody that you work with has to honor this. And so, relocalization, real commitments, and get off fossil fuels. We've done it at the Land Peace Foundation. Stop using plastics. We're doing it. You can do it. All simple things that might make us a little bit uncomfortable for a minute, but then you'll be fine. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Now, if we could actually collect any of the comment cards or question cards, we can bring those up to the front. Remember, we have ushers that do have cards and pencils. If you decide you do have a question after all, go ahead and jot it down. And then we'll move into the Q&A portion for the last 15 minutes, 10-ish minutes. Ushers, do we have any cards, any questions? Oh, okay. I just assumed everybody absorbed everything and all their questions were answered.
As you're doing this and collecting things, we had a glimpse. We had a glimpse into how the environment can come back. And it feels like a dream or a nightmare, what happened. And I think a lot of times people don't talk about now or acknowledge that we went through a pandemic. And that grief that we all hold, which I think is a really big part of feeling like we can't do anything at this point, that we're all holding this. But what happened also in that time period, amidst all of that loss, is that we were home, things calmed down, the consumerism diminished, and our world started to come back and started to heal itself. in a major way. And then all of a sudden, it was like we came out of that moment that was a glimpse of what could happen if we stopped. And to me, that was a moment of learning and maybe some hope toward the end of that. So I know that everyone is also, 4 years ago feels like a moment ago, at least to me. I don't know about all of you, but yeah.
I think that the rapidity with which things rebounded surprised everyone that was paying attention. Fish returned to habitats they hadn't been in 100 years. There was plants that started to thrive. Waterways started to clean up within 3 months. I mean, the earth has the powerful ability to heal. She has a powerful ability to heal herself. And so slight changes in our movement can make a humongous difference in a very short amount of time.
Well, I'll ask and start with Sherri. I mean, Sherri, I think Sherri is really adept and a really great speaker. I mean, but I feel like this is like something that you've talked about before. If that works for you. Or I can do this. I'll read the question out and then we'll see. Has your lives as women and the knowledge of women before you molded your idea of sustainability?
Yes. Yeah. We are hosting annual matriarchs gatherings at Wajukam Tultina. And we have had women from 8 to 10 different countries that have come each year. And recognizing that it is the women who make sure that the family is cared for. They keep the family together. They make sure that everybody is fed, that everybody is safe. It has come down through the woman the way to protect the thread of life and the continuity of the thread of life through time. And so we carry those threads as mothers and grandmothers and daughters and sisters, granddaughters, grandmothers, to carry that thread of life across time. So we are the weavers. And I also, in Sacred Instructions, chapter 11 is the chapter on women being the water bearers of the universe. That we carry the sacred waters of life in our bodies. We are deeply connected to that. We are the portal through which life enters into this world. And the life that enters into this world through us lives in its first ecosystem, its mother's womb, before it steps foot on Mother Earth. And in that time of gestation, in that first ecosystem within their mother's womb, they are right below the mother's heart. So they have this connection to divine wisdom through the portal that brings life in through a woman's body, and a connection to heart-based knowing that comes to them through the steady, rhythm of their mother's heart. And so that connection, that deep connection to life that women hold as creators, co-creators, not just of physical life, but of bringing forward and giving life to everything, I think is powerful. And right now I feel like it's critically important for women to step into a place of strength in guiding the world back into alignment with life. Because it has been an imbalanced patriarchal reality that has carried us away from life. And this isn't Bash on Men Day. This is a patriarchal reality that has robbed men of their hearts and their intuitive wisdom by denying the feminine within them as well. And so how do we take responsibility for guiding life back toward alignment with this sacred pathway, this thread of life? but also how do we bring balance back to the hearts of human beings by reintroducing and reincorporating the elements of the sacred feminine. And one of the things that I was talking with Suzanne about out back is that, we have to remember that our strength as women isn't hard, it's soft, right? That the strength that we carry is pliable, it's fluid, it moves with the times, it's resilient, it's nurturing, it's loving, it's gentling, it's calming, it's peace building, right? It's all of those things. And so I think yes is the answer to that question. Yeah, do you have more to say on that?
Sherri gave a great answer to this. This past year, I think I taught my favorite course that I've ever taught in the entirety of my career. It was called Indigenous Women and the Power of Rematriation. And the reason why I love this course is that we took time to look at Indigenous women all over the world and what they were doing, but not only them, but their teachers through time and who they were teaching. And I think that's such an important aspect of when you hear and listen to what people are doing. I'm sitting here between two women who have had many women before them teach them and are teaching young women now. And when you're out there in the world, I think it's important to ask those questions. Who are your teachers? Please tell me about them. How does that sustain you today? And who are you teaching today? And that's that long view. I think in our culture, we often think a lot about Cherokee culture, what the consequences are of what we do. Traditionally, we're meant to keep a balance of things. And for people who don't think about those consequences, they're sort of out of the traditional ways of achieving tohi, or balance. And we're always trying to achieve that balance. And it's just such a wonderful way of thinking about the intentionality of getting there and being in that place. And I think, in the environmental movement and all these movements that are going on, there needs to be a discussion about intentionality. What is our intent? How do we get there without allowing, all the personal stuff or negativity to impede our way to get there? And how do we do it in a good way that makes sure that people feel like they're included and coming along with us? And, I think that's a lot of what women in my life have done, the women who've gone before me. And so maintaining that and bringing that into the future is vitally important.
And I think you can share something on that too as a mother of daughters.
Oh, yes. I have two younger children. I have a thought, though, before that was the idea of women, how it has molded, or women, how they molded my ideas of sustainability. And it's sort of, I feel like the stories of women of my past and of my history have really sort of, and the people around me, mostly the women around me, have really kind of helped me to form my drive for the work that I do. And because I think in the women I see, and I feel, in myself, I feel both the pain that we hold, as well as the beauty that exists in the same sphere. I know for many of us, we have a lot of trauma in our communities. We've experienced trauma, we grew up with trauma, or sort of these colonial legacies of harm that told us we weren't good enough, that told us we weren't smart enough. And the tools that people use to manage those things create a lot of sadness in our communities. And it's the women that I work with that I can feel them feeling not good enough as they're being told, come give us your knowledge, help inform decision makers, right? Even in that statement, who is a decision maker? Not the person informing you, right? Not the native person anymore. If you're informing a decision maker, you're not in power. And it's in those positions of being told, we want to know your knowledge, but you're not actually good enough to be a decision maker, or there's multiple examples of that happening over and over again, of people being told they're not smart enough. But yet they hold this generational knowledge that is being valued and uplifted by so many scientists, but not the people themselves, we'll say, right? The knowledge is, they're saying, give us your Indigenous knowledge, but let's not uplift the people. And I think it's those women that drive me. It's my family line that I think about the pain that exists there, and I think about who they could have been if our economies were thriving, if we had, our own technologies, and we were a thriving community. And when I think sustainability for the future, it's more, how can we create a system for ourselves where we're not reliant on people telling us how good we are?
Okay. I think we're going to wrap up. Yeah, you don't want to do this last question? I'm going to do this last question.
You do this last question because
I'll
I'm
be
loving
as quick
this
as
conversation.
I'll be as quick as I can because I think this is important. How to awaken those who have traveled so far away from the source. We are living in a time that is incredibly polarized, where the us versus them division is increasing, where we want to villainize people who don't look like us or think like us. We want to other those people and distinguish ourselves from them. And one of the things that I have given a lot of thought to and I've written about is how do we bridge these perceived divides between us? And how do we remember that we're all related? That we're all required to caretake one another, because we've forgotten our humanity through this colonization of our hearts and minds. We've forgotten how to take care of one another. We farm our old people out to old age farms, right? Rather than keeping that elder wisdom in our house. And when we separate ourselves from elder wisdom, and when we hold elders up who are too frail to hold leadership positions, in a way that makes us lose confidence in our elders, we are living in a society that has lost its way. And so this is how I want to answer this question. So when I think about people who trend orange in our society, right, and have elaborate comb-overs, how do I find a way to not be infuriated by the sight of them? Is I think, what if that were my beloved uncle who had some type of brain injury or dementia? Because what we're witnessing is a spiritual and mental illness that is caused by the distortion in the ways that we have been living as societies. And those who are so completely lost need to be lovingly walked back home, because otherwise we're going to further the division. So that is my advice, is to really think about how do we lovingly walk back toward a place of alignment with life, those who have lost their connection to the sources of life. Because it's a pitiful place to be, right? It's really a pitiful place to be. Do you guys have any advice on that question?
Good ending. Agreed.
A huge round of applause for our panelists. This was amazing.